It's Brian here from Triage Method, Nutritionist and Coach. Today I'm going to be talking to you about alcohol, how to fit alcohol into your overall diet and lifestyle, because while there's no real benefit, from a health perspective in terms of drinking alcohol, and there are quite a lot of negatives, the adjacent benefits could be argued to be, it helps people to socialize, and that is definitely an important part of someone's overall healthy lifestyle, okay? And as well, at Triage Method, we understand that people, have social lives and they want to be able to incorporate this stuff, but they also have, health and fitness goals that they don't want to completely sacrifice just for the purpose of drinking alcohol. So we have to help them make better choices, essentially. So that's what I'm going to go through today. Definitely in Irish drinking culture, it's not the healthiest, but we have to help people make choices where possible. And I'd rather people and you watching be informed and know how to manage this stuff a little bit better than basically just having no information and just being told, well, just drink as little as possible, because that's not going to be the realistic outcome for a lot of people. Like, a lot of us do enjoy having a social drink, and like I said, it does support social interactions, which are very important. So let's first consider, what is actually the issue with alcohol in the diet? Like, how does it actually cause us problems? How does it slow down our progress? These are the things I want to go into, because I think people maybe have the idea that, okay, cool, alcohol contains calories, and if I drink a lot of drinks, then I'm racking up a lot of calories. And that is true, that is part of this discussion. Like, if you go out and have, say, 6 pints, that is about 1,000 calories, right? Depending on what exact beer that you're drinking and what the alcoholic strength of it is. But it's not the only thing. There's also the adjacent behaviors related to drinking as they relate to food and maybe even exercise, right? So if you can imagine the kebab or the McDonald's or something like that on the way home from a night out, you've been out for several hours, you haven't eaten in quite a while in a lot of cases. Maybe you have dinner and then go out, or maybe you're having dinner out, but usually there's quite a lot of time that elapses between when you've had your last meal and then you go drinking and then it's time to go home, right? So it could easily be 5-6 hours since you've actually eaten, which is, reasonably long, and you're going to be a bit hungrier, and the alcohol also will make you a bit hungrier, and therefore you end up going in for the chipper or whatever it is, right? Which can clock up quite a lot of calories. It's right there at the end of the evening as well. So it doesn't really do anything for you in terms of, this is going to keep me full for a few hours. No, you're going to eat it and then probably be in bed within a couple of hours, okay? So it's a lot of calories for very little reward in that sense. And then we can think about the next day. People could be hungover, don't feel like cooking, maybe don't have that much food prepared, barely able to, get out of bed or get off the couch, depending on how much they had to drink. And this facilitates, eating takeaways, getting pizza, whatever the case may be. But basically that can be just another very high calorie day, potentially added on to another one the previous evening because of maybe the drinks and then the food after the night out. So you can see how this is all clocking up to maybe be detrimental to, say, body composition goals, for example. And if you're also in a pretty bad way after the night out, you probably don't feel like going and doing any exercise, you probably don't feel like going even out for a walk or anything like that. You may just end up very sedentary for that whole day on the couch, whatever it may be. And this is obviously not good for your overall activity levels. It results in a very sedentary day. And another issue that comes in here as well is when you're out drinking, your inhibitions are naturally lowered, and it just means that you're a bit more impulsive around food and other decisions potentially, and it makes it more likely that you might engage in eating behaviors that don't really fit your goals, right? Because the fast food suddenly becomes very, very attractive, very, very tasty, very, very appealing. And because you're that bit more disinhibited, it's harder to kind of have that little dialogue with yourself, like, okay, do I want to have this? Does this fit with my goals? In some cases, people may not even have any concept of the decisions that they're making, depending on how much alcohol they have consumed. So those are the main things I think people need to be aware of broadly in terms of incorporating alcohol into the diet. So it's not just the alcohol, but it's also the adjacent food behaviors, the impact on activity levels, and that can extend, of course, into subsequent days. So if you go out on a Saturday night, you might feel pretty bad on Sunday, but even Monday, maybe even Tuesday, you're still a little bit more lethargic. You haven't been sleeping well. After the night out, you're a bit more tired, you're a bit more depleted just from it, and you may not end up doing your intended training sessions, which obviously has knock-on effects to your overall goals depending on what they are. So with all that said, let's actually review some of the better choices to make when it comes to alcoholic beverages. Now, of course, good option is always going to be to just drink less alcohol, have less drinks total, and of course as well you can consider in this the availability of 0% alcohol or very, very low alcohol percentage drinks, which are more widely available now as I record this. Those are good options as well, but let's look at the actual alcoholic beverages so that you have an idea of how to manage this stuff when you're going out for some drinks. So generally, the best option from a caloric point of view is going to be the spirit plus a low calorie or 0 calorie mixer of some sort. Okay, so examples of this would be a gin and slimline tonic, a vodka and Sprite, where the Sprite is 0 calorie, a vodka and Coke Zero, a whiskey and Coke Zero. Those kinds of drinks, quite low in calories. They may clock up about 100 calories. Cans of hard seltzers as well tend to be quite low in calories. Those are usually vodka based, but they could be 80, 90, 100 calories maybe per can. So these are quite low calorie when we're considering the different options that you have available in terms of choosing alcoholic beverages. Bottles of light beer, also reasonably good. They tend to come in at around the 100 calorie mark. Bottles then are generally preferable to pints of beer because they're lower in calories, and this is not because there's something special about the fact that it's bottled. Of course not. Like, it's the same product whether it's in the pint or it's in the bottle. However, a bottle is smaller, okay? 330 ml versus close to 600 ml for a pint. It just means that drink for drink, you could end up consuming less if you choose to go for bottles. If you're in a situation where you're with people, you're getting rounds in, if you choose a bottle every round, you'll end up drinking about half as much as if you were going for pints every round. So it's the same choice of consumption in terms of, well, I'm drinking beer, but the way it's portioned, right? And this applies to a lot of foods, right? You could get a multi-pack of chocolate bars and they're pre-portioned for you. You could end up eating less of those versus, say, just a big block of chocolate, right, that you break off a portion for yourself. So it kind of works in the same way. The portioning is just sort of done for you, provided you make that choice. And then when it comes to actual pints and, say, glasses of wine, those are kind of middle of the road where calories are concerned. They'll come in at around 200 calories, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, depending on the alcohol percentage. Higher percentage alcohol is going to be more calories. So, for example, craft beers can be quite high percentage alcohols, maybe up to like 8%. And those ones will be higher in calories than, say, your standard 5% alcohol lager. And then when we're looking at wine, there's about 160 calories in a glass of wine. That's assuming that, it's 4 glasses in a 750 ml bottle. This doesn't apply to, those giant wine glasses that can take a whole bottle of wine, right? That's not going to be a 160 calorie glass, unfortunately. And then within cocktails, there's quite a lot of diversity, naturally, because there can be such an array of ingredients that goes into a cocktail. But some of these are quite okay options as well, kind of in that middle of the road category. They're not super high calories as far as alcoholic beverages go, and they're also not the lowest. So things in this category might be things like mojitos, margaritas, they're not super high in calories. Whiskey sours as well, they come in around 150 calories, the ones that I just mentioned there. And then the worst choices generally are going to be the heavier cocktails, things like a White Russian, for example, a pina colada, because these can have sort of high fat and high sugar ingredients in them as well. So that tends to drive the calories up. So it all really comes down to what's actually going into the cocktail that you're choosing. Like, is there, creams or coconut milks or things like that, regular milk? Is there a lot of sugars and syrups and things that go into it? All those things will accumulate more calories going into your beverage. Bailey's is also reasonably calorie dense because it's, a cream liqueur, so I think that probably gives it away, the fact that it's going to be fairly rich. That's about 160 calories per 50 ml serving of that. And then some of the Alco Pops as well tend to be reasonably high in calories, things like the Blue Wickeds, the Smirnoff Ice, because there's so much sugar in them, they might come in around 250 calories in a smaller bottle, not even the big bottle. So those are the best and worst options when it comes to selecting alcoholic beverages based on their caloric contribution, okay? Which, when you're trying to manage nutrition, body composition, health, those are important considerations. Now, you have to take into account other factors like how fast do I drink certain drinks. I could say to you, okay, well, a measure of vodka is not that high in calories, but if you just take that as a shot, then you've consumed that in a few seconds. So it's not a great way to pace yourself. What is a good way of pacing yourself is including non-alcoholic beverages in amongst your alcoholic drinks on the night, okay? So for example, you could just alternate having a zero alcohol beer with a regular beer. Some of the non-alcoholic beers, they still have some carbohydrates in them, so they won't be very low in calories or 0 calories necessarily, because there are some carbohydrates, but they are a lot less than the full alcohol version. So you can do that, or you can just have water in between regular drinks. So you could have whatever the beverage of choice is, then a water, and just break it up that way. And in doing so, you'll end up probably drinking about half as much, which is always a win, because as I said at the start, there's no real health benefits to this, and there can be quite a lot of negatives that come with this. However, some of the 0-0 drinks combinations, for example, if you were to get a 0 alcohol gin and a slimline tonic, that is almost calorie free. It's as close as you can get. So there are different ways to manage this. Some of the non-alcoholic beers will be higher in carbs than others. So those are things to consider when you're trying to make better choices when it comes to alcohol. So that is that. I hope it was helpful. And of course, if you want to see more health, fitness, nutrition content, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're following us at Triage Method for more, and I'll see you next time.